Sometimes we get conflicted in really underestimating the invasion of woody species on our landscapes and especially in our prairies. You go near a large metropolitan area and you'll see that maybe the land that sells for the highest price might be something that would be considered invaded with many woody species that might have been easily controlled by prescribed burning. And so why are trees bad? And if we look at native plant communities, once we get a certain percent canopy over the top of them, we start to see not only how those plant communities are affected, but how even things like hydrology is impacted on the landscape. And so we see more runoff in certain areas because we get the canopy that shades over the top of those plant communities, and the soil actually changes in return as those plant communities change. And so many times we look at the landscape and say, wow, it certainly is pretty with all the trees. But a prairie is not meant to have many trees on it. And quite frankly, in many parts of the state of Kansas now, and what was once tall grass or even mixed grass prairie, now is very much choked by species such as Eastern Red Cedar, Osage Orange, Locust, and other woody species. And fire being withdrawn from that, or the application of fire because of fragmentation or because of varied reasons, and maybe even the fear of the use of fire, has now allowed those species to not only to invade, but in some cases dominate that plant community. And that's simply not the prairie. So if you were to look at the application of prescribed burns and really the timing of those within a year, in the past, you would have primarily seen that window of use of prescribed fire in the month of March and April, and maybe even stretching into early May, when mostly dormant vegetation is burned ahead of new growth that would occur when temperatures start to warm up in the spring. More frequently, or I guess more recently, I would say, is that we are now starting to see and use growing season burns or even late season burns to specifically reach a goal that a producer might have in mind. And certainly one of those, as an example, would be Sericea Lespedeza. And Sericea Lespedeza is a very vigorous and invasive type of legume species that is pretty much common throughout the state of Kansas. But the application of prescribed burning during the growing season, after July 15th primarily, when that plant is thinking about trying to set seed, because it is a very prolific cedar, if we can run a prescribed fire through plant communities that have a lot of Sericea Lespedeza in them, we can prevent that plant from making seed, which is one of the things that we can do to battle against that plant overtaking some of our prairie landscapes. So the use of fire at different times of the year is now being investigated and used more than it ever has been. Maybe not historically, but certainly from the evolution of man's use of fire more recently in the last 50 years or so. So growing season burns typically occur after July 15th, and they can occur all the way up until just a few weeks before frost. The idea would be to at least get some cover, some green regrowth prior to a killing freeze. That way the landscape would be again protected or covered through the winter months. But great goals, great opportunities to be able to realize some impacts of prescribed fire when naturally or historically we probably did have fires in those months of the year. So use of fire during that time is certainly another prescription that we address.